and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism.
I'm Shahar Azani, Senior Vice President at JBS, former Israeli diplomat, and a proud Pride Zionist and activist. And I'm thrilled to bring you today the first ever Zionist family panel in this one-of-a-kind Jewish National Fund USA series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. It's no secret that we need all the friends we can get, which brings me to our very special guests today. Let's get to know them. Dumisani Washington is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. He is the former diversity outreach coordinator for the over 10 million member Christians United for Israel. Dumisani is a pastor. He's a professional musician and the author whose latest book is the second edition of Zionism and the Black Church, Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. Olga and Washington is a South African native and CEO of DAISY International, which stands for Defense, Embrace, Invest, and Support Israel, South African-based Christian pro-Israel advocacy and education organization. She is also the regional director and educator for Club Z, and she is happily and wonderfully married to Joshua Washington. Joshua Washington is the director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, where he plans events and regularly speaks. He's a composition graduate of the University of Pacific's Conservatory of Music and was formerly IBSI's Director of Special Events. Guys, it is such a pleasure to have all of you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Shahar.
I'm very excited about this because you represent a unique story in the fight for Israel and Zionism. The three of you, members of one family in more than one way, really, you're prominent leaders in your communities and you're fighters for justice and for Israel. I want to ask you, what propels you to stand up for Israel and for Zionism? I'm sure it's not an easy arena to be in, and the question is directed at each one of you. Maybe we start with you, Dumisani.
Well, Shahar, again, thank you for having us. My story, in short, it's just started as a young man. I was brought up as a Christian, a very philo-Semitic home in the Black Baptist church tradition, in which music and sermons were infused with what we would call biblical Zionism, right? Songs that were sung, sermons that were said. And there was a deep connection to even a longer history when it came to whether it was Negro spirituals, the identification with the Jewish people when it came through slavery, when it came through Jim Crow segregation, singing songs that actually would speak of Moses, speak of Joshua, these types of things, which is nothing new. It's a very, very old tradition in the Black community. And so for me, as I got older, I found out more about the modern state of Israel, found out about the Jewish diaspora, the Jews of India, the Jews of Ethiopia. It was a fascinating thing for me. And then lastly, when I heard how Israel was delegitimized with those very terms, Zionism being racism, or those types of Jim Crow terms thrown at Israel, not only were those things not true, but they held deep significance for me as a Black American, very aware of my history. It incensed me, but it also fired me up. And I began to talk. I have a big mouth like my parents, a blessed memory. And I began to talk, and I've been talking ever since.
Incredible. Olga.
So also, it's an absolute pleasure to be with everybody here on this panel. Shahar, I've not seen you in years, so how awesome to be reunited on this platform. What makes me do what I do? The first one is, if you look at the Mishra part of my surname, I come from South Africa, and my parents tell me that I've also had a big mouth for as long as they can remember. And I remember my dad coming home from a speaking tour in the United States and being very incensed that the BDS was using the South African narrative that Israel is an apartheid state. So taking the apartheid portion of that and said that as Black South Africans, we had to do something about it. At that time, Olga was not interested. I was busy with my law career, but he said, no, you need to do something about this. And so as I learned and as I started to engage and understand what was happening, then I was like, no, I really do need to do something about it. And so the first reason is because of my South African history, being a proud South African, being proud of how South Africa has overcome its various challenges. I'm saying, no, you can't take our history and use it to put a narrative on a people who are not committing apartheid and use it for their delegitimization. The second part for why I do what I do is because I'm a Christian, and I've come to learn and appreciate, excuse me, that there would be no Christianity if it were not for the Jewish people. You cannot explain Christianity if it were not for the Jews as well as for Judaism. And so as a Christian, I am encouraged to do what I do. And then thirdly, it's Africa. I'm a proud African. I'm a student of Africa. And I've come to learn and recognize that for over 3,000 years, you look all the way back to Queen Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, her visit to King Solomon in Jerusalem, that Africa's had this special relationship with Israel. And even if you go back to the 1950s, 1960s, when African nations were coming out of colonization, who was their friend? Israel was their friend. And so these three main reasons inspire what I do. And then the Washington part of my surname, I happen to be married into a very proud Zionist family. And so that's just continued to ensure that I do what I do.
That is indeed a beautiful and holy union. I just want to, before we move to Joshua, I just have one quick question for you. You mentioned your Black identity and, of course, the South African part of your identity. Last month, you penned a wonderful op-ed in the Times of Israel entitled "Africa Pays for the Israel Apartheid Lie." Could you tell us in just what is the main argument there?
Sure. So that op-ed was actually issued around the 20th anniversary of the Durban Conference. And without going into too much detail on that, the Durban Conference happened in 2001. And it was the United Nations bringing together world leaders as well as non-government organizations to address the scourge of apartheid, the scourge of racism and what that entailed. But instead of actually finding a solution in relation to racism across the world, that conference committed racism against the Jewish people by penning this notion that Israel is an apartheid state. It is also from that particular conference that BDS, as we know it today, was born. And so what we saw then, what we've continued to see is this fixation with this lie about who Israel is and what she is doing. And as a result, African problems from slavery, we have got over 1 million slaves on the African continent today. Terrorism is a major issue. Africa is now the hub of terrorism in the world. So various issues around Africa where we need world attention, where there needs to be accountability. That's not happening because everybody's fixated with this lie that was taken from the African people against the Jewish people.
Truly a huge issue and important to remember. Joshua, and now to you. Last but not least, tell us a little bit, once we prep the ground with your father and your wife, what makes you who you are?
Thank you, Shahar. And again, as was previously stated, thank you for having us. It's an honor to be a part of this. Similarly to my father and my wife, I was raised in a Christian household, and one that was very philo-Semitic, one that we understood, as Olga said, that there would be no Christian faith without the Jewish people. And so having that understanding and always, we grew up in a house where our parents were very involved in our education. And whether it was us being homeschooled or when we were in public schooling, they were still very much involved in what we learned and sought to teach us. And so going to college and seeing kind of the beginnings of this whole social justice and how that was being attached to being anti-Israel and being a musician and being in the music space, being an artist and meeting other artists who, a lot of artists like to be political. They want to speak out on certain issues and often they're unfortunately ill-informed on Israel. And those things, along with my father discovering these things about the civil rights movement that was pro-Israel in the 1970s called Black Americans Supporting Israel Committee, and these different gems that he's found and things that I had found in my own research as well, had just compelled me to speak up against the misuse of Dr. King's legacy and the misuse of the civil rights language. It was one thing for people to come against Israel, but then it was a completely different thing that people would use the language of justice to come against Israel. That was a new thing for me that did anger me. And my personality, I'm not a natural big mouth like my father or my wife said they were, but it was something that compelled me as an artist, as someone who likes to create and write music to speak out on those issues, and to also with the music community that I have, to influence those artists that I do know, so that they can use their gift to actually tell the truth instead of just say what's popular. And so that's what's been driving me, both just having that understanding as a Christian, but also as a Black American who knows his history and knows his roots, to tell the truth about what's happening and to actually use that platform of justice for good.
There's no better gift to give or receive than one that can connect you with nature and your homeland. JNF has made it super easy for you to order your tree certificate online. Just go to jnf.org/trees, pick which special occasion it's for, order your tree online, and let's get planting. Every tree counts.
The presence of music as an element of your personality and advocacy and standing up for justice, and you're referring to it as an artist. Now, naturally, everybody who is viewing this wonderful interview understands that it's much easier to just go with the flow of so many in the creative community who are swept away by the lie, and yet you were able not just resist that, but also stand your ground. What role does music play in your Zionism, in your standing up for justice?
Well, music was the vehicle that I used in my advocacy before I ever started speaking formally. When I was too afraid to actually, write an op-ed or to stand up and to speak in front of a crowd, or even at a time in college where I was afraid, where I didn't feel equipped enough to debate a person one-on-one. Music was the thing that helped me to express myself in a way where I felt protected, because as artists, their art's very personal. These are my thoughts, these are my views, these are my feelings. And also you could unveil it a little bit. So, you can have these themes of Zionism. And so for a while, that was my only vehicle until I felt like I was in a place where I could actually speak and defend what I'm saying. And then I think my music started changing. It started becoming a little bit more blatant, but also it served as a supplement, as a complement, I should say, to my advocacy.
Thank you. That's a real inspiration. Dumisani, we mentioned your book in the intro, Zionism in the Black Church in the 21st Century. We've seen the Black Lives Matter movement's leadership, platform, and agenda come out against Israel. I want to ask you, what is your message to them, to their followers, and to everyone really in this regard of the relationship between the Black community and Zionism in Israel?
Well, Shahar, what my message has been from the beginning, when I mean from the beginning, shortly after BLM's founding, their founding was 2013, but 2014, they had exploded on the scene. So I mentioned it in my book, and I've mentioned it in my advocacy to the leaders, to those particular who are responsible. My message has consistently been that they've been deceived, and they are unfortunately deceiving others. And I mean by that, their anti-Israel, anti-Zionist message, not only is it wrong, but it is particularly offensive in that it actually exploits the Black community, the death of people like Mike Brown, the death of people like George Floyd, to actually take those tragic occasions to not only not truly advocate for what's going on the ground, but to twist it into an anti-Semitic narrative. Is just the height of hypocrisy. And it's very unfortunate. As I've said also in my book, the vast majority of the members of the BLM aren't aware of those things, right? They're on the street, they're on the ground, they're advocating, they are doing the work, if you will. So what we have said to those others who've been members, we've made it very clear that though it is a righteous thing to fight for justice, to shift blame and blame another ethnic group of people is not only not fixing the problems, actually exacerbating the problem. In other words, you cannot be anti-Black racism and then be against Israel, if you will, be anti-Semitic at the same time. Those things cancel each other out, and they actually make things worse. So this is what we've said, that you can actually fight for justice, but you can do it clear-eyed, clear-minded, and with moral authority, instead of being, like you said, swept away by the crowd or what the narrative actually is.
And might I add, just ask, how was that brave message received? What kind of reactions have you received from like-minded people in this regard, in this realm?
Well, what's always amazing to me, and I say this oftentimes in my advocacy, I've been able to travel the country, blessed to be able to do that with CUFI, been able to do that with IPSI, talk to pastors and everyone. And I can say, and I say this in all seriousness, although I may say I'm joking, whenever we get pushback, we mean IPSI, about that stance, uncovering the truth of that whole, the anti-Israel part of Black Lives Matter, it's almost never from the Black community. I want to be very, very clear about that, because those who are connected to the community, they're concerned about what's going on. When they come to the realization that the organization often is misrepresenting itself by being anti-Semitic, they accept that, they see that, and they continue to fight, and they'll even distance themselves from the anti-Semitism. It'll be others, unfortunately, who are not from the Black community, who feel that they're doing good, who will often ignore the anti-Semitism of BLM as if that's a good thing, and it's bad for our Jewish brothers and sisters, and it's bad for the Black community.
We're talking with a beautiful family here. And I want to ask you, how does your activism impact all of you as a family? Does it play a role around the dinner table? How does it work inside the house? Share with us a little bit from the inside what you can. Feel free to intervene.
I'm pausing because I'm letting my kids start. I'll just jump in and say this quick and let them go. From the time that Joshua obviously was a little boy, we would talk about these types of things around our table, right? That's how I was raised, right? I learned about Black history first from my mom in the kitchen in her sewing room, and my dad. That's how I learned. They grew up in the segregated South of Little Rock, Arkansas, and that was just a natural thing for me. We would talk about Israel, talk about Africa, talk about the Black Jewish community, talk about current events, and we would talk about those things very organically, right? And so that is where that was shaped for us. So it's not even a planned thing. It just happens. Plus, it's often loud because my kids are loud like me. And so we have some very, very vibrant conversations. So I'll leave it to the kids.
Loud and musical, I have to say.
Yes, sir, that too. Absolutely.
Olga?
I'll pick up on the vibrant part. So one of the things that's amazing about being part of a Zionist family is that whenever there is something that's going on in the world, or you have questions in your learning, is that there are people, and wise people, if I may say, so that you can bounce those conversations off on. My father in South Africa was my first mentor in this space. And then my father-in-law, who I happened to have met before I met my husband, he became a mentor as well. And that's kind of how Joshua got to know me. So if I were to describe it now, it's a natural thing. We don't switch on and off our Zionism. Oh, today we're going to talk about a particular matter regarding Israel or Zionism or truth or justice. No, it really defines who we are from the moment that we wake up and until we drop the kids off with the grandparents, or even Ezra, we're teaching him Hebrew again, not because we want him to be seen as something. Ezra's our firstborn. To be seen as something that we're trying to create, but it's naturally part of our DNA and truly defines who we are as a family.
Joshua?
Yeah, echoing that. I mean, it's like Olga said, it's not an on-off switch. Olga and I did meet because of our fathers being in the same space as Zionists, as pastors, and I reached out to her because, among many other things, she came from a family that was a strong Zionist family, and that's and it's not something. Sometimes we have to actively switch it off so that we can just relax for a minute, but it's just because it's so natural. We can be just hanging out in the living room, and then next thing you know, I don't even realize that we're deep into this conversation about what's happening right now, in Nigeria and how it relates to Israel and what we need to be doing about it. It's like Olga said, it's a very natural thing.
I want to put the spotlight on something that has been very clear to me from the first moment you emerged on the squares before me, is that the fire of justice is very much alive within you. And Zionism is just part of your societal leadership and aspiration to see a more just society. The fact is that Israel and Zionism happen to be suffering significantly from these plights of injustice, but they're part and parcel of what each and every one of you have received within the family. Even Dumisani himself referenced his parents and his family and the role that family plays. And I think that the idea of the family being a pillar of justice is one that resonates from you guys and needs to resonate with everybody who is seeing you now, which leads me to the next question. And I'll start with you this time, Joshua. You're both proud children of your parents and families. Your activism is in your blood. So you found yourself growing to become leaders, right? Emerging, learning, developing. And the question many parents are asking is, what's your secret? What are you doing? And how are you handling your kids now to follow in your footsteps? Please give us the recipe.
I don't know if there is a secret recipe. I mean, I think that one thing I learned from my parents, and I'm still learning, I think, and it's something Olga and I talk about all the time, is, there is a certain amount of, there's a large amount, I think, of consistency when it comes to raising your kids to be justice minded and to be kind and to be concerned for those who are either less fortunate or just, even if people are far away, to be concerned with what's going on around the world. I think it starts with just a consistent shaping of their character in their everyday dealings with, whether it's their siblings or friends. It's something that, my parents we weren't Zionists just because my parents said when we were kids, you need to love Israel. They taught us those things, but then there was also just my father, my mother were very, very serious and passionate about us being good people. And so treating people with kindness. My father was always very adamant about, no matter who the person is, you always treat them right, because you never know what people are going through, and you never know what the future holds for you and that person. And those traits for me translate into the bigger things. So treating people with kindness, it may not look like it connects, but it does connect to what I do in Zionism, because that is to me, there is a link between that and that. And so I think it's even if my parents had never taught us anything about Israel, those qualities I think would have still led me to do what I'm doing now, because they gave me a good foundation. And I think that's what we try to do with our kids is teach them those qualities. And the other stuff, the things that are more public will follow, I think, naturally.
This is one of the most important messages I've personally ever heard when it comes to conversations on Zionism. And I'm a great believer in the faith of be a good person, be good people, be good to those around you. And Zionism will come naturally to you because it's part and parcel of that message. So thank you for emphasizing that without hammering it into people's hearts. It comes natural from the inside, from you, from Olga and Dumisani, and of course, the entire surroundings where you grew up in and continue to live in. So it's exciting to think what is yet to come from your wonderful family.
Are you looking for that perfect gift? The one thing you know that they won't have? Now you can honor someone you love and participate in the sacred act of writing a Torah. You can go online and choose a letter, word, verse, or more in a Torah being written right here in Israel on top of Masada. A beautiful certificate will be sent, signifying the link to our ancient past, and be something that they can keep forever. It's the ideal gift for birth, bar and bat mitzvahs, birthdays, engagements, weddings, anniversaries, and other milestones in life.
Olga, I personally remember from a few months ago a video of yours that went viral on social media when you stood your ground in the face of the haters of Israel, and in spite of their heckling and activism, you stood there and you danced before them with the flag of Israel. And it touched my heart to such a degree to see that kind of passion and support. So I want to ask you, there must have been pushback to your unique position on Israel and Zionism, to the very special person that you are. What have been your experiences in this regard, and what have your reactions been to them?
Well, I have lost friends. I have been called names, from being a sellout to being a slave master's servant, all sorts of things. But the thing that has kept me grounded, first of all, is God and my faith in Him. Second of all, has been the consistent, if I can borrow Joshua's words, a consistent example of my parents. My dad has made various decisions in his life where he knew that what he was doing was right before God. It was right with regards to truth and justice. And he said that the objective here is not to be popular, but it's to do the right thing. And I'm very thankful to have the same example here in the United States. And so there are moments when one is fatigued and tired and hurt and disappointed. And you sit down, you take a breather. If there are tears, you wipe those tears, and then you get up and continue to stand strong, because we know that what we're doing is right, and not right because we say it's right. It's right because it's based on facts, and it's based on what justice and truth are, and because we're Christians, and we know that it's also based on the truth of the Word of God.
Dumisani, great job. I mean, just looking around your kids, your daughter-in-law, your surroundings, your activism, I think that the message that's come out of our discussion today has been to be good. And the reason I find this great liking towards you is first because you're good people and you care about those around you. And then it ties into your Zionist identity. And I think this is an amazing message. I'd like you to say thank you so much to you, to your family, to everyone involved, for all that you are and you do for the people around you and for Israel and the Jewish people. It's a great honor, pleasure, and privilege to speak with you and to be able to thank you in person. And thank you for sharing your very personal and incredibly important insights for the sake of all of us.
Thank you, Shahar. Again, we thank you for having us here. And we hope that what we are doing will help and inspire other people. That's what we want to do, both with our organization and with our family as well. But again, thank you so much for having us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Olga, Dumisani, and Joshua. And to all of you watching, I'd like to say, let's continue to be inspired, touched in the heart by all that we've heard today and every day about Israel and Zionism. Let's stand up for Israel and remember, it's a true privilege and honor, not to mention a great pleasure, as we see Israel growing and developing before us, before our very eyes, with every passing day and moment. Let us share Israel's story of success and hope with the world. Let us be good people. And let's remember that we should be the ones who tell our story. Let no one else own it. So follow ZTV Station. Sign up to the YouTube channel at youtube.com Zionism Studios today. Because remember, this is Zionism. Thank you all for watching.